"Sir, could you please be our dad, just for one day?" The two little girls stood on the sidewalk, clutching each other's hands, their eyes filled with hope. Ethan Blackwood, millionaire, CEO, and stranger to fatherhood, had never been so disarmed in his life. What began as an awkward question from two strangers would soon unravel secrets, ignite memories long buried, and test the very foundation of what it means to be a family. The rain had barely stopped when Ethan Blackwood's black SUV pulled up in front of Brooksville Elementary School. The air still held the scent of wet pavement and fallen leaves, a reminder of the storm that had battered the small town the night before. Ethan checked his watch impatiently, his assistant's voice still ringing in his ear. "Mr. Blackwood, the city zoning board moved the meeting up. If you want that land for the tech hub, you need to sign by Friday." He didn't have time for distractions, and yet, here he was. The only reason Ethan had agreed to speak at Career Day was because the school was offering a tax-deductible donation package. He didn't care much for children, he barely remembered what it was like to be one himself. Childhood, for Ethan, had been a shadowy memory filled with locked doors, yelling voices, and endless waiting for someone who never came. He was checking his phone again when he heard the voice. "Excuse me, sir, are you Mr. Blackwood?" He looked up to see two small girls, Winslow older than 7. They stood side by side in matching raincoats, one purple, one yellow, each with a little backpack clutched in front like a shield. Their cheeks were pink from the wind, and their eyes were large, pleading. "Yes," Ethan said, slowly wary, "can I help you?" The girl in purple stepped forward. Her voice was small but steady. "Can you please do us a favor, just for one day?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "A favor? We need you to pretend to be our dad." The other one whispered, not quite meeting his eyes. The silence that followed was thick. Ethan blinked, sure he'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "Our school has a family festival this Friday," the first girl explained. "There's a parents and heroes dance, but we don't have anyone to come with us. Our mom works late and can't come, and we don't have a dad. But Ms. Chambers said if we can bring a parent or a role model, we can still go. You spoke in our class today, and you were nice." Ethan stared. In all his years of closing billion-dollar deals, nothing had thrown him quite like this. "You want me, a complete stranger, to pretend to be your father, for one night?" The girls nodded. He wanted to laugh, he wanted to say no, but then he looked closer. There was something raw in their faces. Not manipulation, not childish mischief, just pure, aching hope. He cleared his throat. "What are your names?" "I'm Lily," said the one in purple. "And I'm Grace," said the one in yellow. Twins. "Of course. Listen, Lily, Grace, I'm not sure that's a good idea. I don't really know you, and you don't know me." Grace's lower lip trembled. "Please, just one night. You don't have to buy us anything, or stay long. Just show up, so the other kids don't laugh at us again." That stopped him cold. Again. He looked away, jaw tightening. For a brief, unguarded second, he remembered what it felt like to be the kid with no one in the audience. To watch other children run into their parents' arms while he waited, alone on the steps of foster homes. His voice was quieter than he expected. "Where's your mother?" "She works the night shift at Golden Spoon Diner," Lily answered. "She's really nice, but she's tired all the time. She says she's sorry, but we know she's just trying to pay the rent." Ethan didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "One day, just the festival, that's it." The girls lit up like sunrise. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," they said in unison, and before he could stop them, they had wrapped their small arms around his waist. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something stir inside his chest, a flicker, a warmth he didn't recognize, or maybe had just forgotten. "All right," he muttered, "but don't make this a habit." They giggled and ran off, to catch their bus, waving wildly as they disappeared down the road. Ethan watched them go, still stunned. Something about this felt like the start of something much bigger than either of them understood. He just didn't know yet that by agreeing to one day, he'd signed up for a lifetime. The days that followed moved in a blur for Ethan Blackwood, yet something inside him had shifted. It wasn't just the unexpected meeting with the twin girls, Lily and Grace, that haunted his thoughts. It was their voices, their eyes, and the quiet desperation that clung to them like a second skin. He told himself it was nothing, just a favor, one event, one night, nothing more. But his heart knew better. Even if his mind hadn't caught up, Yet, by Tuesday morning, he found himself distracted in meetings, fidgeting through contracts, and staring blankly out of the windows of his sleek high-rise office, overlooking the city skyline. The pitch deck from his assistant sat untouched. His normally razor-sharp focus was dulled by questions that had no place in his world of boardrooms and billion-dollar ventures. Why had they chosen him? Why not a teacher, a neighbor, anyone but the coldest man in the room that day? He hadn't smiled once during career day, hadn't told a single joke, and yet, they saw something, or maybe they just didn't have anyone else. Late that afternoon, he called his driver and asked to be dropped off a few blocks away from Golden Spoon Diner. He told himself it was just curiosity, but the truth was simpler. He wanted to see their mother. He wanted to understand. The diner sat on the corner of a quiet street, wedged between a laundromat and a pawn shop. It had old neon signage, flickering with age, and fogged-up windows that made it look warmer than it had any right to be. Ethan stepped inside and was hit by the scent of grilled onions, strong coffee, and something else: fatigue, the kind that hung in the air and seeped into the bones of those working long hours on tired feet. She was there. He recognized her immediately from the pictures taped on Lily's notebook cover. A woman in her early 30s, with the same tired but kind eyes. Her name tag read Jenna. Her uniform was clean, but faded. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her smile flickered each time she passed a table, like a candle refusing to go out. He watched for a moment before taking a seat at the far corner booth. She came over, not recognizing him, and placed a menu on the table. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice warm despite the exhaustion underneath. Ethan hesitated, then said, "Do you have 2 daughters named Lily and Grace?" Her smile faltered, her back straightened, but her hands stayed steady. "I'm sorry, do I know you? They asked me to come to the school festival this Friday. They said you couldn't make it." She stared at him for a long moment, eyes darting across his face, trying to place him. Then, the realization dawned. "You're the businessman from Career Day." He nodded. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay with it. I don't want to overstep." Jenna's expression softened, and her eyes glistened. "They told me what they asked. I was going to call the school and tell them not to bother you. I didn't expect you to say yes." "Neither did I," Ethan replied honestly. For a moment, they sat in silence. "They're good kids," she said finally. "Too good for the life I've given them. I work doubles, sometimes triples. I try to be there, but it's never enough." Ethan's throat tightened unexpectedly. "They don't blame you." "I know," she whispered. "That's what makes it worse." There was a moment when he could have stood up, made a polite excuse, and walked out of the diner, but instead, he asked, "Is their father around?" She shook her head. "He left before they were born. I've raised them alone ever since. They ask questions sometimes, but I don't have many answers." Only that he didn't stay. Something sharp twisted inside him. He remembered his own mother, sitting by a window every evening with a phone that never rang, waiting for a man who had long moved on. He remembered her hiding tears, telling stories that made a monster sound like a hero, just so a little boy wouldn't lose hope. Jenna moved to another table, refilled coffees, took an order, then returned. "I don't expect you to do anything. I know you're busy and important, but they chose you because they saw something. I'm not sure what, but they did, and that means something to them. I won't let them down," Ethan said before he realized he meant it. That night, instead of returning to his penthouse, he drove past the school, then the neighborhood where Jenna lived. The buildings were small, some with chipped paint and flickering porch lights, but they weren't empty. There was life inside. Families, laughter, struggle, love. He hadn't known that kind of life in decades. The next day, he did something he hadn't done in years. He cleared his Friday evening schedule. His assistant protested until he said, simply, "It's personal." Then he called his tailor. "I need a suit that says Cool Dad, not corporate exec, and I need it by Friday." The man laughed, thinking it was a joke, but Ethan wasn't laughing. That same day, he received an email from the school with details about the festival: food trucks, raffle prizes, parent-kid costume contests, dance performances. And then one line that stood out: "Each child will receive a small medal from their attending parent, thanking them for being brave, kind, or unique in some way." He read that sentence over and over. Something cracked open inside him. He hadn't received a medal or a thank you. or a father's praise, and now he had the chance to give that to someone else. I think the twins might not just be strangers. What are you saying? Carson's voice lowered. You remember Anna Cole? Ethan froze. It had been years. He hadn't thought of her in a decade. You're telling me? I'm telling you, there's a possibility. You're not just helping someone else's kids, Ethan. The line went quiet. You might be helping your own. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan stared out the window, watching the city lights blur into gold and shadow. Everything in his life had been about control, order, logic, but nothing about this made sense. And suddenly, Friday night couldn't come soon enough. He needed answers, and the festival was only the beginning. The day of the school festival arrived, cloaked in golden light. It was one of those rare autumn evenings where the sun dipped low behind orange trees, and the air held the soft chill of approaching winter. But none of that registered in Ethan Blackwood's mind. His thoughts were a whirlwind of half-formed questions and emotions he hadn't let surface in years. He stood in front of the mirror, tightening the navy blue tie his tailor had rushed overnight. The suit was lighter than what he usually wore, less intimidating, more relaxed. The fabric was soft, casual, almost kind. It felt strange, like putting on someone else's life. For a man who built his empire with spreadsheets and silence, the last few days had been something else entirely. He couldn't focus at work. He couldn't sleep. That name Anna Cole kept looping in his head, a name buried so deep in his past he'd nearly forgotten what her voice sounded like. But now, a sealed custody file, a changed identity, and twin girls whose last names didn't match. Ethan had once loved Anna, not in a fairy tale kind of way, not the forever kind, but deeply enough that the loss had left a scar. Their relationship ended abruptly, lost in the noise of his rising career and her quiet disappearance. No note, no call, just gone. He never understood why. And now, two little girls with hauntingly familiar eyes had asked him to stand by them. For just one day he took a breath, grabbed the small gift bag he'd prepared, and headed out. Inside were two simple medals engraved just that morning. One read to Lily, for being brave in silence. The other read to Grace, for leading with kindness. As the car pulled up to the school, Ethan was greeted by the sound of laughter, carnival, music, and the smell of cotton candy mixed with popcorn. String lights dangled from trees, booths lined the sidewalks, and kids in costumes darted between games. It was everything he remembered wishing for as a child and never having. Then he saw them. Lily and Grace were waiting by the school entrance, bouncing in place, eyes wide with joy. Grace wore a little astronaut suit, helmet tucked under her arm. Lily wore a white lab coat over a dress and had a toy stethoscope around her neck. Their hair was neatly brushed into matching braids, and their cheeks flushed with excitement. You came, Lily cried, throwing her arms around him without hesitation. You look so different, Grace said, eyes twinkling. Not like the businessman. You look like ... like a real dad. Ethan's heart squeezed. Well, he said softly, tonight, I'm yours. They walked together through the festival, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan wasn't pretending. He helped them with games, cheered at their dance performance, and even let Lily smear cotton candy on his jacket. He smiled without realizing it. He laughed until his stomach hurt. Then came the moment that would shift everything. The stage had been set up near the gymnasium. Parents were called up one by one to join their children and present the medals they'd prepared. The host, a cheerful teacher named Mrs. Jennings, guided them. When it was Ethan's turn, he stepped onto the stage beside the girls. The crowd hushed. He glanced at Lily and Grace, who looked up at him with such pure, expectant joy that something in his chest cracked wide open. I was asked to do something small, he began, his voice steadier than he felt. To come here, just for one night, and pretend. But what I found was something very real. He turned to the girls, crouching down. Lily, he said, handing her the medal, for being brave, even when no one sees it. Grace, he said, placing the second medal around her neck, for showing the world what kindness looks like. They beamed, hugging him tightly as applause rippled through the crowd. It should have been a perfect moment. But then a voice sharp and cold cut through the air. Ethan Blackwood. He turned. A woman stood just off stage, arms folded, face pale with fury. She wore a grey coat and held a clipboard. A badge glinted on her lapel. I need to speak with you now. The crowd murmured, confused. The girls looked up, frightened. Ethan, stood slowly. "Who are you?" "Child Protective Services," she said. "We received an anonymous tip regarding unauthorized contact with minors under sealed guardianship." Jenna appeared beside the woman, breathless, as if she'd run all the way from the diner. Her face was full of panic. "Wait, please," she gasped. "This is a mistake. He's not hurting anyone, he was just helping." But the woman shook her head. "Mr. Blackwood will have to come with us for questioning, and until further notice, he is not to have any further contact with the children." Gasps erupted. Lily clutched his hand. "What's happening?" Grace's eyes brimmed with tears. "Are they taking you away?" Ethan looked between the girls, Jenna, and the crowd now whispering all around them. Something twisted deep in his gut knot. Fear, not shame, but fire. He wasn't going to walk away. "Not this time. I'll go," he said quietly, "but I'm not done fighting. I don't know what this is really about, but I promise you I'll find out, and I'll be back." As he was led away from the stage, the girls reached for him one last time. He turned his head, locking eyes with them. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The walls of the CPS office were cold and sterile, the kind of place designed to make people feel small. Ethan sat at the end of a narrow table, his hands folded, his jaw clenched. The overhead light buzzed faintly, matching the rhythm of his rising anger. Across from him sat a caseworker mid-40s, glasses sliding down her nose, her expression unreadable as she flipped through the thin file in front of her. "I don't understand how this is even happening," Ethan said finally, his voice low but steady. "I was invited to the event. I didn't break in. I didn't lie. The girls asked me to come." The caseworker looked up, finally meeting his eyes. "Mr. Blackwood, this isn't about the event. It's about what might lie beneath it." "What does that even mean?" he asked. She hesitated, then tapped the file with her pen. "There's a history tied to these children. Complications, a sealed guardianship file. A mother who changed her identity a decade ago. And now suddenly a high-profile businessman is spending time with them, unofficially, emotionally involved. You see how that might raise flags." "I'm not just some stranger," he said, a little too fast. "Then who are you?" Ethan opened his mouth, closed it. The truth was, he didn't know yet. Not fully. He didn't know if Lily and Grace were connected to Anna, or if his instincts were just grasping for meaning where there was none. But what he did know without a doubt was that he wasn't ready to walk away. Not from them. "I'm someone who cares," he said at last. "And maybe I've waited too long in life to say that about anyone." The caseworker looked unconvinced, but not hostile. "Look, Mr. Blackwood, this isn't about questioning your intentions. But when children are involved, especially children with a fragile home life, we take precautions. Someone made a call, anonymously. They mentioned your sudden appearance, your influence, your money. We're required to look deeper." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Someone wanted to keep me away. Possibly. Or someone was trying to protect them." He leaned back in his chair, the weight of the moment settling hard in his chest. He thought of Lily's bright eyes when she first saw him at the festival, Grace's quiet strength, the way Jenna had looked at him with fear and apology, like someone used to losing everything. "Can I talk to Jenna?" he asked. "She's being interviewed separately. Standard protocol. I need to know if she's the same Jenna who used to go by Anna Cole." The caseworker didn't answer immediately. She studied him, weighing silence against transparency. Then she sighed. "I can't give you details of her past, but I can confirm that there is a historical record connecting the name Anna Cole to a sealed custody dispute involving twin girls born in the same hospital where Ms. Jenna Sullivan delivered. Beyond that, I suggest you speak to her directly. Once this investigation concludes." Ethan left the building an hour later, frustrated but more determined than ever. Back in his car, he opened his phone and did something he hadn't done in over 10 years. He opened the folder in his private cloud titled Anna. Only one photo remained. A faded picture of her standing at the edge of a park, holding a book, smiling like the world hadn't yet crushed her spirit. He stared at it for a long time. The next morning, he showed up at the diner just before dawn. Jenna was taking out the trash, her hair in a messy bun, sleeves rolled up against the chill. She froze when she saw him. "Ethan," she whispered, panic rising in her voice. "You shouldn't be here. I needed to see you." She looked around, ushered him behind the alley wall. "They told me to cut contact," she said. "They're watching everything now. I could lose the girls. If they think I'm hiding something, I'm not here to make trouble." But you and we have unfinished history, and I need the truth. 10 years ago, you disappeared, and now these girls show up, asking me to be their dad for one day on. Something in me just knew. Jenna, are they mine? Her face crumpled like a dam giving way. I didn't want this, she said, voice cracking. I never planned to involve you. I thought I could raise them alone. I didn't even think you'd remember me. I remembered, he said quietly. I just didn't understand why you left. I was pregnant, Ethan, and I knew you weren't ready. You were climbing, building your empire, chasing things I couldn't even understand. I was scared. I didn't want to be your burden. You weren't, he said, voice heavy with regret. I just didn't know how to be anything else. Jenna leaned against the brick wall, shaking. I changed my name, moved across the state. I thought if I gave them a quiet life, kept them safe, that was enough. But the world doesn't let you stay hidden forever. Why now? Why did they pick me? They don't know, she whispered. I never told them about you. I never showed them pictures. But kids, they feel things. They recognize what we try to bury. I think some part of them knew, even if they couldn't explain it. Ethan stepped closer, 1,000 emotions rising all at once. Shock, sadness, guilt, awe. I want to be in their lives, Jenna, not just for one night. I want to know them. I want them to know me. She met his eyes. And what if CPS doesn't allow it? Then I fight, with everything I have. Jenna nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. They need you. But more than that, they deserve the truth. As the sun crested the horizon, casting golden light over the city, Ethan knew his entire world had changed. The empire he'd built suddenly meant nothing if it didn't have room for two little girls with brave hearts and matching braids. He wasn't just fighting a system now. He was fighting to become the man he should have been all along. The courtroom was silent, but the tension inside felt like thunder. Every seat was filled. Neighbors, teachers, even a few parents from the school who had watched Ethan hand medals to two little girls under the glowing lights of the fall festival. But today, there were no lights, no music, only judgment, paperwork, and a decision that could tear a fragile family apart. Ethan sat at the long wooden table beside his attorney, his hands folded tightly in his lap. He wore no tie this time, no carefully tailored suit. He didn't want to look like a billionaire trying to buy his way in. He wanted them to see him as what he truly was, now a man who had spent too long building everything except what mattered most. Across the room, Jenna sat alone, her eyes locked on her lap. She hadn't spoken to him in 2 days, not since the morning behind the diner. When she had finally broken down and told the truth, she was scared, not of him, of the system, of the secrets she had tried to bury coming back to life. And in the middle of it all, Lily and Grace waited outside the courtroom with a social worker, clutching each other's hands, wondering if their one magical night had cost them the life they barely knew they wanted. The judge cleared her throat. We are here to determine whether Mr. Ethan Blackwood has a legal right to petition for guardianship, inquiry, or supervised contact with the minors in question, Grace and Lily Sullivan. The court has received documentation that suggests a past relationship between Mr. Blackwood and the children's mother, formerly Anna Cole. However, the paternity has not yet been established. Mr. Blackwood, do you wish to speak before we begin formal review? Ethan stood slowly. Your Honor, he began. I'm not here to take anything away from these girls. I'm here because I believe I might be their father, and whether or not biology proves that true, I'm not going anywhere. I came into their lives by chance, but I'm staying by choice. They deserve to know they are wanted, not just protected. I'm willing to go through every test, every interview, every hour of supervised contact, if that's what it takes. But please don't shut this door before we even open it. The judge nodded, not unkindly, but professionally. And Ms. Sullivan, would you like to speak? Jenna rose, her voice trembling. I made mistakes, she said. I ran away from my past because I didn't believe I could offer my girls a better future by holding on to it. But I see now that I was wrong. Ethan was never the enemy. He deserved to know the truth, and whether or not the court grants anything today, I support his effort to be in their lives. The judge took a breath, then turned to the attorney from CPS, a man with silver hair and a tone as dry as paper rose, and began reading from a stack of notes, citing every regulation, every protocol, every reason why introducing Ethan into the girls' lives might be destabilizing. Ethan kept his head down, listening without interruption. He didn't flinch. He didn't interrupt. He was done reacting in anger. He was learning what it meant to fight with patience, not just power. When the judge recessed for deliberation, Ethan stepped into the hallway and found Lily and Grace sitting on a bench, their backpacks on their laps like shields. They looked up as he approached. Grace's eyes were wary. Lily's were filled with hope. "Are you in trouble again?" Lily asked softly. "No, sweetheart," he said, kneeling beside her. "Just trying to make sure I can keep my promise." "What promise?" Grace asked. "That I won't walk away, that I'll be here, as long as you'll let me." The girls looked at each other, then at him. "We want you to stay," Grace whispered, "even if it's just for a little while." Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. "Then I will." An hour later, the judge returned. In light of the recent statements, and the willingness of all parties to proceed with full transparency and cooperation, this court grants temporary supervised contact between Mr. Ethan Blackwood and the minors, effective immediately. A paternity test will be administered within 72 hours, and further arrangements will be based on those results and psychological evaluations. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a loss. It was a beginning. Outside the courthouse, as the evening sun broke through the clouds, Ethan, Jenna, and the girls walked together for the first time, not as strangers, not as a broken puzzle, but as people trying to find their way toward something whole. And as Lily reached up to take Ethan's hand, while Grace walked quietly on his other side, Ethan understood something that no court ruling could change. Love wasn't something you were handed, it was something you showed up for. Every single day, no matter how late, no matter how hard, and he was finally ready to show up. The test results came back on a quiet Tuesday morning. There was no dramatic phone call, no emotional outburst in the courthouse, just a simple envelope delivered to Ethan's downtown office, stamped with the Department of Child Services logo. His assistant had handed it to him like any other piece of mail, not knowing that the small slip of paper inside had the power to rewrite an entire lifetime. Ethan didn't open it right away. He stared at it for hours, not because he was afraid of what it might say, but because for the first time in his life, the answer no longer changed what he knew in his heart. He already loved them. He already saw them as his dot, and whatever the result said, he wasn't leaving. Still, when he finally did tear it open, his hands trembled, just a little, and when he read the words, "Probability of paternity, 99.98%, his breath caught in his throat. He stood, silently, walked to the window of his office, and stared out over the city he had once ruled with logic and ambition. A city that had never made him feel as alive as two small voices calling him Dad in a school gymnasium lit by fairy lights. He picked up his phone. "Jenna," he said quietly, "it's official. They're mine." On the other end, there was a silence, and then a quiet sob. "I always knew," she whispered. "I just never thought I'd get the chance to admit it." "You don't have to be alone anymore," he said. "Not with them, not with me." That weekend, they met at the park neutral ground. Grace and Lily came running the moment they saw him, their laughter slicing through the cold like sunshine. "Did they say we can live with you now?" Lily asked, hopeful. Ethan knelt to her level, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Not yet, but we get to spend time together. Real time. We're building something now, something that's going to last." Grace stepped forward. "Are you mad at Mom?" Ethan shook his head. "No, she did what she thought was best, and she kept you safe. That's what matters." That day turned into a series of days. Afternoons in the park, supervised visits at family centers, dinners in quiet corners of town where they could talk without the world staring. Ethan didn't push, he didn't rush. He let the girls come to him in their own time. And then, something extraordinary happened. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, in the community center reading books, Grace leaned her head on his arm. "You know what's funny?" she said. "At first I thought you were just pretending to be our dad, like in a play." Ethan looked down at her. "And now I think maybe you were always supposed to be." That single sentence broke something open inside him. Years of walls, built high and strong, fell apart in that quiet moment, not with fanfare, not with noise, just truth, the kind of truth that doesn't ask permission, the kind that belongs to you forever. By spring, the caseworker had submitted her final report. "Ethan Blackwood," she said, seated across from the judge for the last time, "has not only complied with every requirement, but has demonstrated a depth of emotional commitment and parental instinct we rarely see in non-custodial cases. The girls are thriving under his presence, and while this journey began unconventionally, it is our belief that continuing to deny Mr. Blackwood full custodial rights would no longer serve the best interest of the children. Ethan looked at Jenna, who smiled through tears. She didn't fight it. She didn't need to, because somewhere along the way, they had stopped trying to win against each other and started building something with each other. It wasn't a romance. It was something deeper. It was shared history, shared heartache, shared love for two little girls who had brought them both back to life. So when the judge granted joint custody, there were no cheers, just quiet, reverent joy. The kind that comes when broken pieces finally find their place. That night, the girls spent their first full evening at Ethan's home. He made spaghetti, burned the garlic bread, let them pick movies they'd already seen 100 times, read them stories they barely listened to because they kept asking questions about when he was their age. At bedtime, Lily wrapped her arms around his neck. "Promise you won't leave." "I promise," he whispered, "forever." And Grace, always the quieter one, looked at him with eyes far older than her years. "Sometimes," she said, "you don't find your family, they find you." And with that, she turned off the light. As the house fell into stillness, Ethan stood in the hallway, heart full in a way he had never imagined. The life he had chased before, the wealth, the power, the headlines, meant nothing compared to this quiet, this peace, this purpose. He wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was a father. And not just because a piece of paper said so, because two little girls believed in him when he didn't yet believe in himself. And that belief, that love, had changed everything.